few days ago, I wrote a short essay or blog talking about the different levels of perspective. And considering that the situation right now going on is that there's a lot of information out there in the world being thrown around, a lot of different conversations, a lot of people speaking and not always speaking together, but often at each other. And bearing in mind that we also have to recognize that there are many things we don't know, and we have to acknowledge that we don't know what we don't know. It came to me to write that short essay, and I thought I would speak about it now. For the sake of brevity and for succinct clarity, I refer to different perspectives such as the 2D, 3D and 4D perspective. Although they refer to two-dimensional, three-dimensional, four-dimensional, they are not referring to dimensions in the bigger picture. It's just a way to create a scaling, a framework to distinguish between different degrees of perspective. What I started with was let's call it the consensus reality perspective, the majority perspective, which is the mass narrative. That is what I call the 2D perspective, meaning a kind of flat, level, linear perspective. And that is the general perspective that is part of our social cultural conditioning. It includes the information that we get through most of our mainstream news channels, which is obviously more or less propaganda. All state mainstream news channels are biased towards a particular national agenda. And we have to realize that when we grow up in a certain social cultural setting, we are already within the influences of conditioning, which begins from your peers, your friends and family around you, because they are part of the same environment and often are within the same conditioning. Then we get conditioning as we go through the educational system, and then through through work, through our bosses, and through most social cultural institutions, legal, financial, political, religious. These are conditioning structures, which now are much more global because of globalization and the hegemonic distribution of similar symbols and information, whereas before they were more national. So this is what I call the general consensus reality paradigm. It's the main dominant narrative. And this also plays with the polarities I mentioned earlier about the us versus them, good versus evil, innocent versus guilty. And this is what plays into the general political narratives about, our historical narratives and our present narratives. And when something happens in the world, we're given a particular perspective on that, which is then further condensed and validated by ongoing waves of consensus narrative information, i.e. propaganda. So when a person is receiving information from mainstream media, from government or authority-backed sponsored information in the newspapers or anything like that, you can be, quite assured that that is a manipulated, programmed, or rather an orchestrated narrative trying to entrain the mass consciousness and the mass psychology into a particular perspective, which is a kind of socially engineered perspective. And the majority of people are in this 2D reality construct, and those people who are in this construct, it's very difficult to bring them out of it from by, let's say, by persuasion, or by argument, because they are locked into this perspective, which is highly continued and validated. Then I mentioned the 3D perspective, which is happening a lot now in the world, is that there are people who, through a kind of inner nudge or through an instinct, a gut feeling, have come to the realization that something isn't quite right with the world. We're not really told what's been going on. And especially since the availability of decentralized information, such as through the internet and our fairly recent communication channels, people have been able to move outside the highly controlled, centralized narratives and go to alternative sources, and also to do their own research and investigation. And also they follow, like you say, an internal voice by saying something isn't quite right. And so they have made the decision to wake up or to seek some other source of information from their own imperative. They haven't been forced into this. And through this seeking, they've realized, and they immediately recognize that the information they're receiving is better suited to them. And they can validate it with a kind of, an internal feeling. And this understanding has, again, different degrees, but generally this understanding is that the world is not run the way that we're told it is. Our political institutions and financial institutions are not headed or run by the people that we think they are. They are representatives, they are puppets. And this view comes to understand that the world is run by different groups than we realize, usually what we refer to as the elite groups, or a small number, a minority of well-established players or groups. And these are beyond the national borders. In fact, borders don't really come into their understanding. So national borders, financial borders, identity borders, these don't concern these elite groups. They operate beyond this. And therefore they operate beyond the known spheres of accountability. And they have powers which are not regulated by the regular structures, legal structures, and they are able to dictate a lot of events in the world because they have control over the 2D level, and they operate and manage the 2D level, and they so the 2D level refers to these as conspiracy theories, or if people start to believe in them, you get criticized as being lunatic, or I say a conspiracy, or a heretic, as it used to be called. And so the 2D level always tries to take down any 3D perspectives, because to the 3D level they don't want to be known. They want to keep the reality construct in the 2D level. But the 3D perspectives realize that, as I say, the world is run differently. There are secret organizations, or cabals they may be called, and that they have been behind many world events. They manipulate world events. They operate like a global chessboard. They move pieces around. And these groups lack empathy. They don't care for the general person. They have this vision which they feel their interest for the global future is much more important than people's everyday lives. And, they have been referred to as sociopathic. But they manage events on a much higher level, and they don't operate in a small 2D sphere. And people who with a 3D perspective have come to realize this, and they realize that there's a reality construct larger than the 2D reality construct. So that generally the 2D and 3D both operate within the reality construct more or less. Then I refer to the 4D perspective, which often has been the realm of mystics or seers, sages, and is a perspective where there's an understanding that there are the events that happen in the reality construct are influenced by events beyond almost a transcendent perspective. They are influenced by events outside of the reality construct. They belong to a more or less cosmic universal order. They belong to, they are in correspondence with movements on a say a cosmic scale. And we can use the phrase, when the cosmic wind blows, events happen on this planet. And this 4D perspective understands that there are certain cosmic influences behind the rise and fall of civilizations, behind the consciousness shifts along whole populaces of people, that there are psychic influences that we're not aware of. There is a way of influencing the collective unconscious and the subconscious of people, the psychic sphere, and that there are energetic movements galactically in the solar system, within the planet, across the planet, that have these much larger correspondences. And these shifts, these movements, these cycles, which can be thousands of years, such as the precessional cycle of 26,000 years, events are in a kind of correspondence. And this is an understanding that goes beyond the consensus reality. And people who have that perspective are few and far between. But I thought I would put these into, I would explain this a little bit, put them into play, just so it may helps me have a kind of understanding that when we're speaking with people, when we're speaking with friends, or when we're receiving information, that they're coming from different levels, and we need to, or it's rather it helps us if we can realize upon which level we're filtering this information, and also that we cannot always communicate with the person if they are entrained with a certain perspective level, and we have to understand that and not necessarily cause conflict between different levels of perspective, and try to communicate with those people that are on our level. As the ancient saying goes, speak to people according to their level of understanding. And at the moment in the world, there are many levels of understanding, and we have to don't allow ourselves to be dragged into conflict by trying to, adjust a non-adjustable level of understanding. Just some thoughts for the moment. Let us stay balanced and stay well.